Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being here this morning. Sorry for the slight delay. As you know that we used to have budget consultation, or we've been having budget consultation prior to the budget being delivered. But we've had a number of requests from people over the past number of months, even prior to the budget being delivered. They said it's okay for you to come and consult with us prior to the budget, but when the budget is actually delivered, we want to know the details of it. Maybe how you kind of contextualize the budget. So this is why we're holding these sessions. Sorry. Oh. And it's actually quite true too, because once the budget is delivered, a lot of people sort of tend to forget about it and do not know about the final details. For us, it's a bit time consuming, but we thought it would be useful to do that. You would have seen the advertisement in the papers that's come out. We are here with you this morning, this afternoon we're at the University of Fiji, and we go to other public places, etc., and hold these sessions. I'm accompanied by the Permanent Secretary for Manfredo Conrote. Shiri Gowda is also the head of fiscal policy in the Ministry of Economy, and Kamal is also here. Kamal Gowda also looks after the sort of planning aspect of things. There are others here that probably could not be here. Pankaj Singh, who's the head of debt, and Iswar Talamembao, who's actually the head of budget itself, where he actually day-to-day controls the money outflows from the respective ministries to the respective ministries. I'll really very quickly give you some key highlights of the budget. The whole idea is for you to be able to ask us as many questions as possible, and if you have any doubts about it, you would have seen, for example, in today's Fiji Sun, a full-page advertisement on the initiative that we started for giving $1,000 to mothers who were children that are born from the 1st of August, and how will the system work. And I'll give you the rationale behind that, but that type of information will be now given out in the papers in the next few days, and of course there will be a lot of publicity around that. So we can start off very quickly. We're looking at the major budget initiatives, the major revenue policies, how do we get money to actually pay for things, and we give you a lot of money to DHP. We give you approximately $36 million a year. And economic update, fiscal performance and debt in summary. Now, again, as you know that the whole focus was on the family, and this is something that we've been working towards for the past number of years. It's the focus of Fijian families. Building upon previous budgets, we have not sort of pulled something out of the hat. If you look at the trend of all the budget, the philosophy behind it, the rationale behind it, it all actually fits into place. And in fact, many of the things that we actually put in this budget, even prior to this, we've actually predicted that will happen because we had actually planned 4 or 5 years ahead. And of course, we were putting a lot of money into infrastructure, education, health, access to water, electricity. And again, the whole idea was, I don't know how many of you read economic analysis, but there was recently a international economist who I understand actually went to this university at some stage in his life, Christy Sen, who now is based in Australia. He's an international economist who was in Reserve Bank of Greece at point in time, but he's been away for a few years now. And he said that he thought that the budget was fairly well balanced, because there's always a fine balance between, if it's an election budget, people like to say we're spending less and look, we're very responsible. But at the same time, if you don't spend enough, then you actually strangle the economy. Because all this road making, all this electricity, etc., reticulation systems, water, it actually creates a lot of jobs. So for example, in Fiji today, there's a shortage of engineers. There's shortage of people in the road making sector, and shortage of people in the water, in the electricity area. So this is why we have, which fits in well with the toppers. The toppers scholarship, as you know, the bulk of the scholarship goes towards science subjects. Because we have people lacking in those areas. So we don't have enough town planners, we don't have enough land surveyors, we don't have enough marine scientists, foresters, etc. That's why we put that focus in place. Now obviously, in order to be able to spur the economy, we need to ensure that there's enough spending within the economy itself. What are the major expenditures? As I said, the main issue here is the $1,000 with parental income of less than $30,000. Of course, if you look at today's papers, there are some children who are born to single mothers, so it would be the income of the mother herself, or it could be that the mother and father are estranged, so you just look at the income of the mother. A lot of people don't realize this, but a few years ago we did a sweep in Fiji. We found something at that point in time, prior to that we had done another sweep. There's something like 26,000 Fijians who did not have a birth certificate. So there are people who are like 45 years old, people who are 55 years old who did not actually have a birth certificate. They've been through almost half of their lives, or 3/4 of their lives, without a birth certificate. Now, one of the requirements to see of this, for you to be entitled to this, you have to register the baby first. So it fulfills one of our other requirements. It's a double-edged sword for us. Because it will ensure in a few years' time, almost everybody will have a birth certificate. So we don't actually have to go out and do this sort of, opening up the BDM offices. If you go to a few weeks before school starts every year, the BDM offices have to be kept open on Saturdays, even Sundays, late in the evenings, because people, that's the time they run to enroll their daughter or son into school. It's all they don't have birth certificate. Then they run around trying to register them. But really you should be registering them at birth. So there's the $1,000 is $500 can be used upon the opening of the account for the rearing of the child. But the other $500 is actually going to be kept in the bank until the child goes to year 1. And then you can withdraw that money. But the point is that in that period of time, you can also deposit money if you want. And we've got an agreement with the banks now that there won't be any fees and charges on that account. You normally know there's a fee and charge until the child goes to year 1. So we're going to also create a culture of savings. You know, the child's first birthday, or some uncle comes from overseas, or auntie said, oh, here's $50 or here's $100. We'd like them to take that money and put it into the bank account. You create a culture of savings. Maternity leave has been increased, of course, to 98 working days. As you know, in Fiji, the law was you had 84 days. Now it's gone up to 98. So the first 3 pregnancies, you get 98 working days. After the 3rd pregnancy, then you get 50% of what your entitlement was for the first 3 pregnancies. We've introduced for the first time paternity leave. Again, you know, a lot of people do. For example, if your partner is about to give birth, people tend to take annual leave. People tend to sort of miss work. So the whole idea is to be transparent about it. So obviously not everybody is going to take paternity leave in a hurry, because not everybody's got a partner who's pregnant. So, you know, it's something that's not going to be an immediate cost. And of course, that cost is paid by all employers, not just government. If you work for USP, so now if your partner falls pregnant, if you're a male, you can then go off and get paternity leave. We've got 5 days family care leave. You come into work, or you're at work and you get a call that your son's had an accident, your daughter's had an accident, you need to be in the hospital there for 2 days, you're entitled to that. Again, not everybody will be entitled to that, but I know most people will probably find some form of family care that's required in the year. But in order to help employers, we have now said that should you be giving people or paying for paternity leave and family care leave, you get 150% tax deduction for your company. So it's not an additional burden on your company. So if they, for example, you're working for company XYZ and you take paternity leave, whatever they pay for you as paternity leave, they can claim back the 150% tax deduction when they file the tax return. So it's less burden on the businesses, but at the same time, you're giving people an opportunity. The reality is a lot of people do eat into the annual leave. A lot of people do miss work because of these situations. And I think once you're transparent about it and give people that opportunity and that empowerment, then people will become more responsible about it. So, I mean, at the end of the day, this does not cost government anything per se, because, you know, this is done by individual employees. We, of course, are employees, but we're not going to give ourselves 150% tax deduction because we don't pay tax. The government, we don't pay tax. Funding for education, you can see how the funding used to be. Of course, over here, free education was introduced, you know, the paying of school fees from year 1 to year 13. Then, of course, that continued this way, that TELS was also introduced, and the toppers was introduced. This is spending last year. That included a lot of the upgrade of the schools. Now, this year, of course, we've got $1.035 billion in education, and I'll show you how that is spent. Ministry of Education, which is the largest ministry in government. It has, for example, employs over 10,000 teachers. We pay for their salaries. It gets about $535 million. Higher education institutions, total of $123 million. That's how it's broken down. In the operating grants, We have USP gets 33 million, University of Fiji 4.2, FNU gets 65. It's completely funded by the Fijian government. You are funded by the Fijian government and other governments. They of course give far less than we give, but you also get grants from bilateral partners like Australia and New Zealand. CDAC, we have Corpus Christi, Fulton College, Montfort Technical College, Montfort Bushtown, Sangam Institute of Technology, which is doing the nursing, Vivekananda Technical College. Then we have this, what we call the operating grants. This is capital grants, which contributes toward, if you add that to that, it will give you 123. FNU Lambasa campus, we're building a campus there, as you know, across the river. Senior campus, there'll be some new works there. Bat Labs, Hospital Livestock Shed at Coron Media. And Maritime Academy across the road from here. We're pumping in a bit of money. There's a lot of opportunities in the Maritime Academy for Fiji. And there's of course $90 million for rehabilitation of schools, which is still rehabilitating schools. Many of the schools, I think over 95% of all the schools, I've said this before, that were damaged in Cyclone Winston did not even have an architectural plan, did not have a building plan, no engineer certification, nothing. A lot of these community-run schools, so whenever the committee had some money, they put up one building. But in fact, it could not withstand the strength of any other cyclone. So we are building back better. We are ensuring that it has some level of compliance to withstand winds up to a certain particular wind speed, etc. That's what we're doing there. And of course, we have the toppers, 43. This is on an annual basis, so 43.8 million here. TELS is $205.6 million. That's on a year. We've got civil service scholarships, 2.3. We've introduced a new scholarship. I'll talk to you about that. Now the scholarships in planning is about $7.2 million. So overall, it gives you an education bill of over $1 billion. That's how the money is spent. Over here, of course, in that is the payment of teachers' fees and also the bus fare subsidy that we give to kids. Also, you may not know this, but we also subsidize children that may be traveling by boats, So they live in Kandavu, they're traveling from one village to another school, and we pay for the punt to take them across to the school. We also subsidize that, and also, in rural areas where there are no buses running, and that's what we also fund from here. Now, we've increased the toppers scholarships from 630 to 950. Now, this is, of course, we've got a lot of flyers on this. You can go to our website, all the information is there. But this is the Year 13 foundation. When you complete that, then you're entitled to the toppers. We've increased also, this is a new one, where there are certain courses that may not be available in Fiji. We've had students leaving Year 13 wanting to do, for example, studies in these areas. We've identified some of them. These necessarily aren't available in Fiji, on a full-time degree basis. So we are saying, and we lack people in these areas, molecular biology, genetic science, forensic accounting, forensic science, meteorology, nutritionists, occupational therapists, clinical psychologists, architectures. To do an architectural course, you can't have it in Fiji. So if people now want to get into that space, we have 20 scholarships that are available for them, and we'll fund that also. So if you add that, you've got 970 scholarship places. We've increased that to that. We've introduced also civil service scholarships, 60 new scholarships. Again, focus on teachers. There was a sort of fairly rough assessment done. They said in a few years' time, all the high schools will lack or have a huge shortage of teachers in maths and science subjects, physics, etc. There's not many teachers going to teach in that area. There's been no impetus for that. So obviously we cannot have that. The other issue, of course, is that we have our English quality is not good. In fact, it has deteriorated over a period of time. So we need to focus on that. I remember when I was in high school, which is many, many decades ago, we had people who were teaching us in high schools with masters in English, etc. We don't necessarily have that anymore. So we are trying to encourage teachers. So there are some teachers, of course, who are very good teachers, but they've only done a diploma and they've been in the system for a period of time. We want them to get a degree qualification. So we're actually going to fund that for them to get a degree qualification. They, of course, can improve their take-home pay also. So we've focused on that. You can see 30 awards for teachers holding a diploma to upgrade to bachelor's degree. The following fields were eligible for this upgrade: maths, physics, language, literature, which is English, information technology, industrial arts, special education, early childhood education. We need a huge focus on that. 20 awards for teachers holding a bachelor's degree to upgrade to postgraduate degree and PhD. Teachers in maths, physics, language, and literature, English will be eligible for that. We have very few people in Fiji with PhDs, for example, in the working system. You tend to find them only in universities. In many countries in the world, you have people with PhD who actually work. I mean, outside university. I don't say who actually work, but then I said who work outside university. Postgraduate scholarship. Again, this is 50 new scholarships we've given in a local for 10 overseas awards for postgraduate studies. Priority areas again in fisheries and forestry, tourism and agriculture. 40 awards for masters, for 20 reserved for civil servants and 20 for people of outside the civil service. We want to encourage people in the private sector too. So some of you may actually go out and work in the private sector. You'll be eligible for this scholarships too. 10 awards for PhDs, 5 reserved for civil servants, the other 5 to have 4 people outside from the private sector too. We have, of course, the scholarship scheme for special children. We actually had not a full scholarship scheme for them. We've now given them the full scholarship with all the allowances that you get as a national topper. They'll get for that. Now, we've made some changes to TELS. Eligibility for allowances increased from parental income to $25,000 to $50,000. If your parents earn up to $50,000, you can now get those allowances that you previously could not get. Bus fare allowance is increased to $30 a week. Because, you know, we have, for example, people traveling, say, from Nahua to Suva or Ba to Lautoka, etc. So the bus fare allowance is not enough. And we've got a new one, of course, 30 places for graduates to get entry to MBBS. We have a lot of people who may have done science and then maybe working somewhere, who may have done pharmacy, but they want to become doctors. So the opportunity for them, with 30 places are reserved for them to get into that space also. Because there is, of course, a shortage of doctors in Fiji. The other thing is that for the TELS, we've got what we call an accelerated repayment initiative. So if you, for example, have a debt of less than $20,000, if you then pay the debt of yours in less than 2 years, then we'll, if you want, for want of a better word, forgive the rest of your debt, 50% of it. But you have to make some repayments. So we call accelerated payment. If you pay 25%, 2 to 4 years, 10% between 4 to 6 years. Similarly, for example, most of you, I assume, would fit in this category here, 20,000 to 49,000 debt level. So if you pay in less than 3 years, or within 3 years, then we forgive 50% of the debt. We write the debt off. If you pay within 3 to 6 years, then we write off 25% of the debt. So it's accelerated. The reality is that you'll have the debt very for you to travel overseas. Once you have these debts, you have to ensure that you have to give some kind of surety, etc. At the moment, you don't need surety. Once you're in university, to get help, you don't need surety. Before you need a surety, you don't need that now. But once you actually start working on a travel overseas, you need to give some form of surety. So we want people to expedite it. We also know that there's a lot of people here who have taken TELS, but the parents can actually afford it. So, the whole idea is, ladies and gentlemen, is that it is not sustainable to say that we'll make university completely free. Because the reality is that you cannot sustain it. Already, the bill from TELS and top is about $900 million by next year, $750 by next year. So you can imagine what it's going to be like in a few years' time after that. 25% of the population in Fiji today is below the age of, 50% of the population, is below the age of 27 today. And you will all go and have kids soon. Hopefully not too soon, you'll have kids soon. You have to think about their education. We can't think about that now, we have to think about the future also. What will happen to those kids if we're going to write off everybody's debt now altogether, or say we'll make it free as some kind of political gimmick? It's not actually sustainable. So we've come up with accelerated payment factor. The reason why we've done that also because if you sort of take your normal time to pay this, it can spread over 15 years. So we'd rather have you paid up front, and then of course we get that money up front which we can use very quickly. And the value of the dollar, as you know, over a long period of time depreciates a lot more rapidly. We've created a new Ministry of Housing and Community Development with an established budget of $41 million. We have a problem in Fiji. A rate of home ownership is very low. So many people, for example, buy their first home when they're in their 30s or in their 40s even. We don't have a culture in Fiji of people, for example, leaving university and one of the first priorities is to buy a home. They prioritize, let's get a home. Because the reality is that if you buy a home, it's your first form of asset. And that's what we want people to do. You'd be surprised how many people in Fiji actually go to money lenders. I've seen footage, in the mornings when on payday, the money actually hits your account around about 3 a.m. in the morning, 3 a.m., 3:30 a.m. That's when the banks actually, credit your accounts. And around about 4 a.m. or 4:30 a.m., I've seen footage of people turning up this many ATM cards with all the PIN numbers. These are the money lenders, and taking out money individually from each of the accounts. Because people normally give the ATM card as a form of surety. So a lot of these people actually don't borrow that much. They borrow 3,000, perhaps 2,000, but they don't have any form of asset. So when they go to mainstream banks and they say, look, I want to borrow $3,000 because my uncle died and I need to pay because some kind of obligation, or my daughter's getting married or whatever it is and I have to buy 5 bangles or whatever the case may be, they go to a money lender. But when they go to the bank says, where is your asset? What can you secure this debt against? They've got nothing to show for it. So you go to money lender simply wants your ATM card. So it's very attractive. But imagine if you had a home, and our concept of what is a home also needs to change. When we say we're going to own our own home, we think about a block of land and a building in it. But our concept of home must also change. We must think of flats as your home. We call strata titling. You can actually own a house in a building on one floor with many other houses on that floor as your home. You have freehold, you can get a 99-year lease over it. That's what they do in Singapore, for example, many other places. So the cost of, for example, putting up a 7-story building or 5-story building with numerous apartments on each floor actually will be far less than doing individual homes on each block of land. So it may well be that the cost of one flat, 1-bedroom flat, even a 2-bedroom flat, could be $90,000. So you may start a job and you start earning $20,000 and you can get a 30-year loan. Maybe 25 years old, you can do the repayment. So we want you to start buying your own homes. For us, the idea is to improve the stockpile of homes that will be available. In order to encourage people, we're actually giving housing grants. It's not something unique to Fiji. Of course, many of these things we look at other countries. For example, Australia does do it too. So we have said we've sort of made it a lot more sophisticated. So if you, for example, earn less than, should have had income bracket, if you earn $50,000 and you buying your first home, we'll give you a $15,000 grant. You have to go through a bank system. So you go to, for example, a XYZ bank, and you say, look, I've seen this home, or it may be a strata title. I've seen this home, I want to buy it, this is my salary, and the bank will do an assessment and say, yes, you can do the repayments. We believe you earn enough income to do the repayments. And you can then apply for also through the bank, we've got the forms available there, a grant of $15,000, which we give to you for the payment of your loan immediately, or to take off from the sale price. And that's a grant, you don't have to pay us back. We want more people to own homes, because for us it makes economic sense. In the same way, if you want to build your first home, we give $10,000. Sorry, if you want to build your home, we give $15,000. If you want to buy your first home, we give $10,000. Why we give you more for building? Because we want more people to build. When you build, you create lots of jobs. This is why there's a huge shortage of tradespeople at the moment. There's so much construction going on. We are getting, just yesterday I was talking to somebody that we're getting something like, 10 to 15 workers from Philippines, Bangladesh, Indonesia as highly skilled tradespeople. There's not enough tile layers in Fiji. You can lay tiles, but you can go crooked. You know, if you want to lay tiles in a hotel and various other places, you need to do a very good job. There's a shortage of people in that area, but it also creates jobs for a lot of Fijians. A lot of electricians, welders in Suva are getting paid $15, $16 an hour. Bricklayers are getting paid $7, $8, $9 an hour in some of the construction sites. There's a shortage of people. So it creates a lot of jobs. If you earn more than $50,000, you're entitled to $10,000 or $5,000. You obviously earn a bit more, so you get less. We also have what we call a first land purchase. We've allocated $5 million in the budget for that. And we contribute $10,000 to the purchase or lease of land. So essentially the Tauke Lands Trust Board or the Lands Department, a lot of people, for example, can get a lease. So, they say, okay, we can buy the lease for $15,000. The TLTV is the purchase price for the lease of $15,000. And then you may be making, lease payments of $1,000 a year or $500, whatever it is. They don't have that much money to actually purchase the lease. So we will contribute towards that, but you must earn less than $50,000 a year. We've also got an interest rate subsidy for the first-time buyers who earn less than $50,000 a year. At the moment, the bank has, prior to the announcement of the budget, the Reserve Bank of Fiji, banks could apply for getting money from Reserve Bank of Fiji at a cheaper interest rate at 1%. And then they would lend to low-income people at about 4% or 5%. Generally about 5% they would lend to them. So the margin they make is about 4%. So what we've said is that low-income people, even though they may be paying less than 5% or 5%, we will subsidize another 1% for them to make it attractive for low-income people, incentivize them to buy the homes. Because for us in the long term, it makes economic sense because we are saving money. If you have more people owning homes in Fiji, they become less dependent on the state. They can stand up on their own 2 feet. They become less dependent on money lenders. So we mainstream financial transactions. That's the rationale behind this. We have, for example, land surveys. If you go to places like Budi Road in Nassori, there are a lot of people who've been living there for decades. And they've got the consent of the landowners, they've got consent of everybody, but the land has not been surveyed. So once the land gets surveyed, then they can get a proper lease. This is why many of them actually don't build proper concrete homes. Because if you don't have a proper lease, a proper title over the land on which you live, banks generally don't lend you money. Or you think, oh, what if I don't get my lease, No point building a nice concrete home because they might boot me out. So, let's sort of live in a lean-to kind of, structure. So we want to help people get the surveys done. It will then lead to people getting proper leases, and once people get proper leases, they feel confident and they build homes. They build homes and they actually build flats, build apartments. We also add lends to the stockpile of housing that we require. Again, this used to be social housing, used to be Ministry of Provincial Development. We moved that into Ministry of Housing and Community Development. And of course, continue with the issuance of proper leases to Fijians in informal settlements. We are doing quite a lot of that. Now, the staff here in the VC will tell you, for every staff that they employ, by law, your entire payroll, the cost of paying employees, 1% of that, we actually have to pay towards what we call the FNTC levy. And that is for ongoing training of your staff. And then you pay that levy of 1%, and then when your staff go on training, any costs associated with that, you can then claim that back. And FNU provides a lot of the training courses, but of course you can have in-house training too. What we've done, we've seen that it's not necessarily working very well. There's complaints about FNU or the FNTC structure not offering proper courses or the right courses for upskilling of staff who are already working. And the other issue, of course, is that we have a lot of the smaller businesses, they pay the 1%, but the staff never go for training. It's kind of money lost, down the drain. So we brought about some new changes in this budget. Everybody will continue to pay the 1%, but it will be restructured differently. We collect approximately $21 million, actually, about $21 million from the 1%. That's how much money that FNTC gets. Of the $21 million now, 50% of that will now go towards what we call the public access to private general practitioners. What will happen from the 1st of January, when we've been working for some time now, trying to come up with the best system. For example, you may live around here in Lodala Bay area. So assuming you wake up in the morning and you feel sick, you're not feeling well, you're a student, you can't go and visit the GP, assuming there's no doctor here, right? Assuming there's no doctor at university. So you will have to go to CWM hospital to get the doctor to check you, and maybe he might prescribe or she might prescribe some medicine for you. What will happen from the 1st of Jan, for any of that kind of what we call unsophisticated medical ailment, you can go to the local GP. There may be a doctor here at Sport City or one of those places here. You can go to the GP, you can see the GP, you don't pay a single cent. We'll pay that for you. That money to pay for that will come out from this 5%, or this 0.5% of the $21 million. So that's approximately about $11 million. They'll go towards paying for that. Why are we doing that? It's because we will put less pressure on the public health system. And a lot of the private doctors are actually underutilized. So, it means that you can go and see a doctor very quickly. You don't have to wait in a long queue, because if you actually go and do an analysis, if you go to CWM hospital in the morning, you'll find a lot of the people who actually go to CWM actually don't have a serious medical problem. It could be a flu, it could be because they've got a sore back, those types of things. Or maybe somebody's got a small cut. My son's got a small cut because he was playing outside. You need the dressing to be put on, so you'll go there. So now those services can be actually provided by the GP, the local GPs. More convenient for you too. So normally you'll get, this is what happens in places like Australia. You go to the local GP and they'll see you. In fact, in places like Queensland, if you turn up to the public hospital with an unsophisticated medical treatment, they'll actually send you away. They won't see you. They say, well, you go and see your GP. So what we are doing here, we're not saying we're going to do that, but the point is that what we're saying is that you can go and see your GPs from the 1st of Jan. So we obviously have to pay for that. So 50% of that $21 million will be used for that. 4%. From 1st of Jan again also, as you know, we started the Accident Compensation Commission of Fiji before third-party insurance. So for example, if you're walking on the road, previously, before we made the change last year, if you're walking on the road and you get hit by a car and the driver was drunk, you will not get any third-party insurance. That was the law. But in order for you to even claim for anything, you actually have to go to the court system. We changed that from last year's budget, and so from 1st of Jan now, we have what we call a no-fault system. So if a kid is crossing the road, runs in front of the bus, gets hit by an oncoming car, you'll get paid. We don't have to determine whose fault was it. He died on the road as a result of a vehicle accident. He or she will get paid the money. Or if they get injured, they'll get paid the money. So we set up the Accident Compensation Commission of Fiji. From 1st of Jan, workers' comp will also go towards that too. At the moment now, many of the companies actually pay workers' compensation insurance. So if, for example, I'm a driver, I'm driving for one of the companies, I'm a truck driver, I get a flat tire, I start changing the tire, and the truck rolls back and crushes the ground. Now, under the old system, it will take ages before that can be determined whose fault was it, what was the percentage of the damage, etc. From 1st of Jan, there's a no-fault system. I'm injured at work, I'm entitled to the payment. Obviously, money needs to be, we need money for that too. So, 0.4% of the $21 million will go towards that. We've also included in that, on the no-fault scheme, injuries at school. I said, Dudley High School, some kids got bashed up. Those type of things will actually get covered. There are many accidents. We see that in primary school. Kids are playing around with pencils and I poke somebody's eye. I've had a couple of incidents where people have lost their eyes because kids are playing around in school. Now, who's going to pay for the kid's eye? When the kid breaks, a leg or something, or fractures the arm. Those sorts of injuries now will be covered under ACCF too. So we have to obviously find the money for that. And 1% will go towards the FNTC levy. We've also provided very quickly bundle insurance for civil servants, disciplinary force and social welfare recipients. So on 100,000 people will actually get covered under that. We'll pay for the premium, makes sense for us. If you have people on social welfare, they need some form of insurance. Because generally, if they don't have enough money, so then they sort of fall out of the safety network. It doesn't cost us that much money to cover 100,000 people. What's it, 5 million? It's $5 million. It's costing us $5 million. The price is money worthwhile spent. So what does it give you? It's very basic cover. It gives you $3,000 upon death and $1,000 for funeral expenses, $3,000 for house fire, $3,000 upon personal injury. Very basic insurance cover. Modest sum, but it is actually quite useful. We've already seen that. It's now working with the sugarcane farmers, copra farmers, rice farmers, dairy farmers. All these farmers are covered. So it doesn't cost that much money, but we're actually trying to create a culture of insurance and also less dependency. In the opposition goes on about dependency, but they're not looking at the policies that we are implementing. So, at the moment, for example, if they did not have this cover, and assuming their house caught on fire, they would come to the government. So a lot of people come to the government and say, we want money, etc. You don't know how to pay, how much to pay. When you have them all covered, you know exactly how much money will be paid, and it's fair and square for everybody. It's a very transparent system. We are also looking at insurance for homes. As you know, that we made various announcements on this, and we've been working on this for some time. We hope to have this product launched before the cyclone season this year. We've allocated $1 billion to pay the premiums for people who come from low-income families. And again, crop insurance, we've set aside $250,000. It's what you call parametric insurance. Normally, the insurance in Fiji is that you, for example, will insure individual homes or individual farms. Parametric insurance essentially is that the way that system works, you say, okay, this was the designated area where the cyclone actually went through. So everybody in that designated area will get a lump sum payout of X amount of dollars. You don't actually have to go and individually assess them. That's how parametric insurance actually works. So that's the system that we are looking at. We're working with the World Bank and various other partners in that respect. Very quickly, ICT has got a huge boost also in this budget. As you know, we're creating Wi-Fi hotspots. We've launched one in Sukuna Park last weekend. We're doing one for Maisuva Park and all other places around Fiji. For example, the Singatoga Market, I think, next week, the Riverside area in Nandi, Shirley Park, Matoka Bar, and various other places. The reason why we're doing this is because we want more people to get accustomed to technology, use technology, share information, and create what we call safe spaces for people to go and use that technology. So if you go into these places, it's what you call geo-fenced. It's only in that area that we mark out, where you get that accessibility, where you have high speeds, bigger bandwidth, and also you get 1 hour for free. You have to simply log in and you get that accessibility. So we find a lot more people are getting used to it and they want to use it, and we want to inculcate that culture. We of course are doing the digital government transformation. The various apps already have been launched this year on the mobile phones, of course. And by August we'll be able to then do things like birth registration, birth notification. You'll get a unique ID number of yourself as a citizen, so you can then access various services, access your accounts in Fiji Revenue Customs Services, go to FNPF, etc. The other fun, of course, wirelessly is the digital television network. Now, of course, you can watch free-to-air television anywhere in Fiji. And to be able to build the redundancies, we're spending about $19 million in that space, free Wi-Fi hotspots. One of the things we've also done, apart from the public Wi-Fi hotspots, we've said all the FNU campuses will also get upgraded, because the FNU campuses, from one perspective, are your poorer cousins. And they need to be able to get that level of technology into their campuses. This is very important, promoting electronic transactions. When you go to a supermarket and you use your ATM card, so for example you go to New World here and use your ATM card to pay for your groceries, when you actually swipe your card, you have to pay 30 cents. No, you have to pay 40 cents. You have to pay 40 cents. They take 40 cents from your account, but they take out 30 cents from the merchant also. So each transaction, the bank actually makes 70 cents. So I can walk into a shop in New Zealand and I can buy a bottle of water with my ATM card. You try doing that in Fiji. They'll chase you away. They say minimum purchase $10. Right? What we want to do is we want to be able to reach that position where you can walk into a shop and buy hopefully even a Chinese lolly with your ATM card. See, because the issue is this. A lot of people don't understand this. When you actually use your ATM card, the money never leaves the system. The money is not taken out of the banks. It's simply maybe a transfer from ANZ to Westpac to maybe Baroda or the Bread Bank or whatever it is. So the money does not leave the financial system, therefore the liquidity remains high. When the liquidity remains high, it means that you have more funds available. When there are more funds available, it means the cost of accessing that money is less. So in other words, the interest rates when you go and borrow money won't be that high. When money is continuously drawn out of the system, there's less money in the system. So therefore the cost of funds will become high. So this is one of the reasons. Also the other point is that when you use the ATM card, it's very easy to track transactions. So we'll know exactly how much money the shop actually received that day. It's another way of tracking income, which is very important. As you know, a lot of people steal from the system. But it's also convenient too. I mean, you don't simply have to carry cash all the time. If you have your card, you can swipe your card everywhere. And that's the whole point. I mean, I had, as you know, with the technology such now, I was a few months back, I was in Australia where people just simply take out their phone and they just swipe it against the machine or whatever it's called, the POS machine, and just put their phone next to it and the money gets taken out from their phone. It is very convenient for people. It's also very convenient to transfer funds to your relatives, family members, etc. So what we have said is that we want the cost of these transactions to come down. So we've got an agreement with the banks now that from 1st of Jan, there won't be any more fees charged to you if you use your ATM cards to purchase goods. At point of sale, POS, point of sale machines. If you go to New World Supermarket, from 1st of Jan, there won't be any fees charged to your account for using that particular service. But they're still charging the merchants 30 cents. We want them to bring it down too. So what we've said to them that we'll subsidize, and we're working out a mechanism where they will also reduce the charges to the merchants, and then we may actually contribute towards the reduction of those charges. And so hopefully then more merchants will, use ATM cards. It will become a lot more easier for you. The other thing that's here is also we're going to subsidize point of sale machines. A point of sale machine costs about 750 Fijian dollars, about 500 Australian dollars. So the corner shop here, Fatty shop or whatever all these places, you need them to have the POS machine. They say, why should I have a POS machine? But if we give them, subsidize it for them, then they might get incentivized. They say, why should I spend 750? They say, look, you don't have to pay 750. We'll pay half of it. And maybe the banks may pay half of it. So it incentivizes them to have the machine. It's more convenient for you, it's more convenient for us. We know exactly how much money they're making. So people pay the right taxes. There's also the right sort of form of making sure that we move along with the times too. So that's the allocation that we made in that respect. So just before this over here, in the digital transformation also, we've landed a cable now in Vanuatu. Fiji, we are very lucky because we have the Southern Cross cable. Just very quickly, the Southern Cross cable connects Australia with the west coast of North America. And the landing spot for that is Botswana, just down the road over here. So anybody that wants to connect to the Southern Cross cable in the Pacific, they have to come to Botswana. So Samoa wants to connect to this Southern Cross cable. So Samoa, as you know, Fiji is here, Vanuatu is here, Viti Levu is here, Samoa is here. So to bring the submarine cable, that cable is going to come between Vanuatu and Taveuni, and then come across to Botswana. So when they said they're going to do that, it's going to be funded by World Bank and various other people, we said, okay, this is an opportunity for us. So we asked them if we can build a pipe out of the cable when it passes between Savu and Taveuni, which we have done. It cost us about $9 million. So that cable actually is now landed. We hope to commission that in the next few weeks' time. What that will mean is automatically, once that cable is switched on, that the speed and the width in Vanuatu will improve by 100% immediately overnight. And of course, what it also means is that we'll then be able to get TFL to lay a fiber optic cable from South to La Masa. Because as you know, there's a lot of jobs in the ICT sector. And even if you look at things like call centers, but also in terms of business processing plants. And we want the Vanua level people to stay in Vanua level 2. You know, we like people. There's a lot of them. And hopefully some of the people from Viti level will go there too. Because it's got a lot of land, a lot of economic opportunity. Real estate is a lot more inexpensive than Viti level. And we want to create more jobs in Vanua level. And as you know that if you set up a new business in Vanua level, you get a 13-year tax holiday. We put that place a few years back. If you set up a new business in Vanua level, in Taviuni, in Lomaiviti, in Lau, in Kandavu, you get a 13-year tax holiday. And of course, now you get a tax holiday if you set up a business between Nosori and Matawalu village in Drasa, all the way up to the northwest of Viti level. Because again, there's one may say there's not much economic activity, so we want to spur growth in those areas. So these are the opportunities we are looking at. You know, I was told a few years ago that when one of the call centers wanted to set up, a South African company, it's called Mindful, wanted to set up in Fiji, and I asked them, I said, why do you want to set up in Fiji? They gave me 3 reasons. One of them was they thought the infrastructure was relatively good, you know, the backbone of the submarine cable, etc. Infrastructure is relatively good. We're in the right time zone because we're exactly 12 hours ahead of the Greenwich Mean Time. It fits in well with the other time zones in other countries. And thirdly, apparently we have neutral accents. As Fijians, we have neutral accents. When they go and set up a call center in India or Philippines, they literally spend millions of dollars to try and get Indians and Filipinos to change their accent so some American or Australian or British person can understand it. It's a fact. So we need to take advantage of that. There's somebody who just set up a business in Lautoka who's got only about 5 people working for his business, where they're now doing the tax returns of Australians. See, there's a lot of opportunity in that. So you can have high-paying jobs in the ICT sector, not just simply answering phone calls or making phone calls or promoting or marketing some product. We have the opportunity to do that. And there's a lot of things being outsourced from Australia and New Zealand. So we could well be, graduates from Fiji who do their CPA, etc., could actually be filing tax returns for Aussies sitting in Suva or Lautoka. And that's the kind of space we want to be in. But in order to be able to do that, we need to be able to create a culture of using technology. So that's the whole rationale behind it. Medicals, very quickly, I don't want to be too long so we can have more time for questions. Again, we've done a lot of healthcare facilities. We're building, for example, a subdivisional hospital in Kayasi, up in Nanronga, Novosa area, so we have they don't have to travel all the way down to Singatoka. We're putting up other health facilities. Valelevu is going to be upgraded, 24/7. All those sort of things are being done. Kidney dialysis center, we're setting up 2 of those in Suva and Nandi. The one in Suva, I think, will be in Nandera, from last spot we are looking at. And we'll subsidize 50% of those people who earn less than $30,000. There are many people who, of course, there's a fine line. There's a lot of people say, oh, make it free. What we have been told is approximately about 600 people who may need actually access to kidney dialysis. About 600 people. So it's not tens of thousands of Fijians, it's about 600 people. But the fact of the matter is that if you, for example, say, let's make it all free, then people can also have this attitude, might as well, eat as many sweet things as possible. If my kidneys fail, these buggers will pay for it in any case. You see? You have to, it's a fine line, you have to do a balance act. It's become more of a political issue, but for us, we've been sort of looking at this issue for quite some time. We have only one nephrologist in Fiji, Dr. Amrish Krishnan, and he's the only nephrologist, so we are working with him to establish this, and he's been giving us a lot of good advice. We're working with the past couple of years, and we're also setting up a new separate kidney center in Tamavua. Free medicine, that will continue, but we've changed this now. As you know that you could get free medicine from private pharmacies also, but the system was a bit cumbersome, where we used to actually give them the medicine and they would stock it, and then if you wanted to get it, then you'd get it from the stock that we gave them. Now the deal will be is that they simply provide it and then they invoice us. It's a lot more easier, so they keep their own stocks. We are working on this. In fact, the PS, Shiri and I, and a couple other people were in India just week before last, looking at the various interested parties. We've got parties interested from Australia too, in developing a PPP for Lautoka and Ba Hostel. Why have we chosen Lautoka? Because Lautoka is closer to the international airport. The whole scheme about the PPP is that they need to provide various procedures that are currently not available in Fiji. So, for example, one of the requirements is that they need to provide, oncology, chemotherapy, etc., for cancer patients, which currently you don't get in Fiji. And the other requirement is that there should be 24/7 availability of open heart surgery facilities available in Fiji. At the moment, most people who do go away overseas, who go to India and to a lesser extent Australia and New Zealand, some people go to Philippines for medical procedures. A lot of it is heart-related, cardiac-related. So the idea is that should be made available in Fiji, so our money does not flow out overseas. And we also train a lot more locals to have the level of exposure. We'll also build a separate theatre for viewing areas when they carry out surgeries for training of our doctors too. And again, as I highlighted, expanding access to private GPs. One of the other things about GPs also is that we want to encourage GPs to go into areas where they currently are not in. If you go to Korovo town, there's not one GP there. So everybody wants to go to a GP, has to go to Nosuri. There's no GP in Nambawalu, there's no GP in Nasarawanga, there's no GP in, I think, Senganga also. So we want GPs to go into that area. And in fact, part of the budget is we'll encourage GPs to go into rural areas. In that way, then we also get doctors to provide services, but at the same time they get to make money because they have a regular source of income. That's the reality. Sugar agriculture, again, they're so self-explanatory, how much money we're giving to the sugar industry. We believe that the way to resolve the sugar, not resolve, but the best assistance you can give farmers is to reduce their input cost. Because if you have, say, we'll give $100 a ton or $500 a ton, if your input cost is very high, there's no point getting a higher level of price for the sugar. In the same way, if I say to you, look, I'll buy a bundle of dollars for 50 bucks, but for you to produce that dollar is going to cost you $45, there's no point. You're making only a $5 margin. But if you help reduce your production cost and bring it down to $20, then of course you make a bigger margin. Even though for example, your purchasing price may be only $30. So that's the way we're looking at things. We've also set up, this is a new initiative, the Stabilization Fund. So we've assured now that $85 per ton for the next 3 years. And should there be any shortfall, there's a Stabilization Fund. FSC, for example, has sold some of these assets, real estate assets that's been underutilized. And that can fund towards them. Government, of course, will work together with them. Two new initiatives very quickly over here is the overall budget for agriculture is increased. Building a local goat meat industry. If today, for example, if Crest shut down today, then you won't have enough chicken meat for us to eat. Right? Crest and Rooster shut down completely, we won't have any meat locally to eat. Maybe one of the backyard chicken farms. So the point what I'm trying to make is that we need to be able to help, in particular in the agricultural industry, one or two businesses to come up to be able to supply the level of meat that's required. And the goat industry, of course, goat is a meat that almost everybody eats. It's very lean, but it's also very high in demand, and it can also solve many of our meat problems too. So to be able to identify one or two farmers, there's one particular farmer in between Ba and Tavua that has about 1,000 goats. And so what they want to do is a similar type of production that they do, for example, with Crest. Crest does not grow all of his chickens. Crest actually outsources chickens to farmers, people in villages, etc. So they may go and give them 500 chicks. Say, you grow these chickens, after X number of weeks, we will then come and buy it from you at the X number of price. So I'll grow the chicks because I know I've got somebody who will buy it from me at that price. You can do a similar thing with goats. You can supplement people's income. So that's the model we are looking at. The other, of course, is brucellosis-free farms. We've had TB and brucellosis in the dairy industry. what actually has been happening, you may have a farm over here, and maybe 5 cows infected, they take out the 5 cows, then they kill it, but they're not actually doing what they do, clean sweep. What they've done, places like New Zealand, one entire farm, even though maybe 5 cows are affected, they kill all the cows, they clean out the pasture, and start afresh. Because otherwise, if you keep on doing only 1 or 2 cows, you never get rid of the problem. So that's one of the things that we've done under this particular funding. Again, civil service reform, we having implemented the performance management system. They'll get paid out early next year, where people get individually assessed now. As I've always said, for example, if all of us over here are civil servants, and these 2 are the jokers in the civil service, and they turn up to work at 10 o'clock, start combing their hair at 3:30 to leave at 4:30, and take 2-hour lunches, when you get a pay rise, not all of us should get the same pay rise, because he may be coming to work, at 7 a.m., may read all the necessary literature, may do really well, answer all the phone calls, etc. So would she. You will be really disincentivizing them if you give all these guys a pay rise too. You say, what's the point of working hard? Might as well not, be like them. Or, in a way, you're incentivizing them to do what they are doing at the moment. They continue to do what they're doing. So we're looking at PMS also, and we're back there the 1st of August. We've also, for example, looked at various places like Etoke Affairs and given pay rise to provincial councils, the staff that have been working there, brought them in alignment with the current civil service reforms that we put in place. Okay. Again, it's very simple, SPT and ECAL. As you know, service turnover tax and ECAL, I heard some politician the other day saying that when they come in, they'll remove ECAL and STT, so the price of your groceries will come down. Well, that's utter nonsense, because you don't pay STT and ECAL on groceries. STT and ECAL is only paid when you stay at a hotel, when you rent a car, when you go and watch a movie, or when you go to the pub to drink. They are what you call choice, they're not everyday items. You don't go and stay at a hotel every day, you don't go rent a car every day, you don't go and watch a movie every day, so you don't go and drink in the pub every day. So these are what you call, they're not necessarily their needs, they may be wants. And fundamentally, the bulk of the STT and ECAL comes to us from the tourism sector. What we've done, though, we've said that now we've put in place a $1.25 million threshold. So, for example, if I'm operating a small four villa motel, a small business person, 4-villa motel, and my gross turnover is $1.25 million or less a year, I no longer have to charge STT and ECAL to the people who come and stay at my place. We're giving them a breathing space. So that's what we've done. That cost us about $16 million to do that. We found it worth our while because these small businesses, we want them to also grow. And they'll also then be able to invest back into the system. Again, like I mentioned to you about the paternity and family care leave, 150% tax deduction. If you train your staff now, and any expenses from that, you can claim 150% back for training of your staff. Again, with 250% tax deduction expenditure incurred on research and development ICT renewable energy. We want to encourage businesses. If, for example, somebody may hire you, if they spend more money on research in those areas, they get a 250% tax deduction. As I've said, we have a huge focus on ICT. And again, the ICT sector, if any company invests in that, they would get a tax holiday. We've now expanded the definition of ICT to include all of this. Include customer contact centers, engineering, design, finance and accounting services, all of this. So as you know that the ICT sector is growing quite significantly and the services that can be provided is quite enlarged now. I don't know how many have been to, for example, Tapu's. If you go to Tapu's and if you stand right on the top floor and if you look out towards Cumming Street and Mark Street, just look at how ugly all the buildings look. Most of the buildings actually look quite bad. If you go, in fact, Ministry of Economy too, if you stand out there, you look at some of the buildings, terrible. So we want to incentivize people to upgrade their buildings. It creates the aesthetics of your towns and cities. So if they invest $1 million, will qualify for 25% investment allowance. So give them 25% as investment allowance, or 125% tax deduction. As you know that we will be hosting the Asian Development Bank annual meeting next year. Great privilege for us. It's never been held in the Pacific. 4,500 people will descend on Mandy for a week. That's a lot of people. We obviously, the logistics is going to be quite phenomenal. Recently we went to the ADB meeting in Manila, and all the logistics behind the scenes, right from security, everything is quite large. But it's a great privilege for us to also give an opportunity to showcase, and hopefully some of you will be participating in it, because we need a lot of young people to be doing a lot of hosting, because there'll be lots of people from different governments, and we need people to be there, chaperones, etc. And we'll be reaching out to university students also for that. And so, but if anybody wants to contribute towards funding of that ADB annual meeting, which we have to, of course, fund to an extent, they get a 150% tax reduction. 55% capital reduction on the price of electric buses. This is one area that we're currently working on quietly with ADB. We believe in the city areas, etc., we need electric buses. We need to reduce our carbon footprint, and we've also provided incentives for people to invest in charging stations. That's the one over here. As you can see, minimum investment $100,000. You get a subsidy for that. The duty on imported fruits used to be 32%. A few years ago we reduced it down, then we reduced it down to 5%. We've now reduced it to 0%. I mean, some people said, oh, this will affect our farmers, but we don't grow strawberries and raspberries, and cranberries and kiwi fruits and apricots and peaches and pomegranates. We used to grow pomegranates a few years ago. It's one of the superfoods, as you know. Now people are discovering to be a superfood, but many people in Suva don't know about pomegranates. We used to grow a lot in the Western Division. But there is a particular type of disease that's actually cracked into the pomegranate trees in Fiji, so they no longer grow. So we import a lot of it. So all of this stuff is, essentially to make it a lot more attractive for people to buy. Tea has been reduced. It's not busting our bank, so it's something that we can, of course, reduce. The trick in all of this, of course, is, ladies and gentlemen, we reduce duty on lots of things, but many of the businesses don't actually pass down the benefits to the consumers. That's why we set up the Economic Intelligence Unit that's within Shiri's department. Again, the carbonated drinks. We found that we put a particular excise duty on locally made carbonated drinks, but we found that many of the businesses started importing cheaper carbonated drinks from overseas to fill in that gap. So, of course, we now have to impose that on imported carbonated drinks. Cigarettes and alcohol, traditionally they go up, and we had an agreement with the cigarette companies that will maintain the increase at 15% for 3 years. And this is the end of the third year, so we'll negotiate with them again for the following year. Plastic bags, as you know, the levy is going up to 20 cents from today. But the plastic bag levies, as you know, currently is charged when you go to a supermarket or a pharmacy or a service station, but there's no levy when you go to the market. Many of you still go to the market and buy your cabbage or roro or whatever it is, and they shove it inside a plastic bag. The levy is not there, but be warned that by 2020 it will be banned across Fiji. So no more using the plastic bag. We've given people a bit more time to sort of adjust to it. And again, we have an age limit on vehicles. You cannot import a vehicle in Fiji that's more than 5 years old. And we used to have, a fairly high duty, then we reduced it if you bought in a hybrid car. That's why you see some of these hybrid cars on the roads. But what we've said now, what we found by talking to all the car dealers, is that when you say a 5-year-old car, a lot of them used to bring in cars that was like 4 years and 10 months old, or 4 years and 11 months old. And then they landed into Fiji. So to incentivize, because technology in motor vehicles are changing every year, to incentivize people to bring in younger cars, we've now said that if you bring in a car that's 2 years or younger, the duty will actually be 15%. Because the reason why we want younger cars is because they have newer technology, which means they have better fuel efficiency. The carbon footprint is less. So that's what we've done here. We've also gave concessions to the taxis. We've also said to them, if they bring in younger cars too, they pay half of the subsisting rate. I think we have to do about 7.5% or something. 5%. It's 5% for taxis. Very quickly, we talk about the economic growth. I just want to show you very quickly some statistics, and you can verify this with the Reserve Bank of Fiji. This is the growth in these years. Now, you know how we talk about 9 years of unprecedented growth. When you have, so you can have growth. See, over here you had growth on average, right? You had average. Because you had 1 year of growth, then you would have 1 year of negative growth, then you have growth again, negative growth. So when you have up and down in the economy, your ability to grow your GDP is not significant. But when you have growth consecutively for a few years, your GDP will significantly grow. And you can see that over here. 2008, since then we've been growing every year. So the GDP has actually gone up to $11.3 billion. So the economy has actually doubled in size in the last 10 years. That's the significant thing about having unbroken growth. And that's the impact that we've had. And so therefore our GDP per capita has actually gone up to about $12,000. But our GDP overall has grown. So that's the significance of it. This is why it's very, we keep on harping on about it. And some people don't like hearing it. But it's important because the economy needs to grow because we need to create more opportunities. You people need jobs. Your children need jobs. We need to provide more incentives. Cyclones cost a lot of money. Winston wiped off $1.3 billion worth, US dollars worth of our GDP. That's significant. This is why we're trying to get insurance products. You know, the help for homes, the home care costs us over $100 million. That's a lot of money. You can't simply keep on dishing out money every year without having the resilience built into your infrastructure. These are the realities that will be faced by any government. So our fundamental goal is to build the fundamentals within the economy itself. Because building the economy is not a political issue, it's actually a social issue. It's about the future of the country. So this is why it's very important for people to understand that that's the impact of having 9 years of consecutive growth. Now you can imagine if that continued, if we stayed on, even some years of course it may be a lesser growth, like Winston after Winston, the growth was quite minimal, but the fact of the matter is we still grew. We did not go into negative mode. Now if we had not grown, then that growth of the GDP would not be significant. This is the growth that we've seen. As you know, this is what I talked about here. Winston went to 0.4. These are the areas of growth that we've had quite significantly. We forecast to grow by another 3%. So continuity and consistency is very important to give assurance both to investors, give assurance to you, people who will be potential investors, the job market. And that's where you can see the success of any country. I mean, even if you study the economics of a country like Australia, you have something like, post-World War II, when you had the Menzies government. I think Menzies was there for about 20 years. But more significantly than that, the growth was quite significant. And that's when Australia grew its deep wealth. They had the massive schemes, the Snowy Mountain Hydro Scheme, etc. That's when they got the deep wealth within the country. So the consistency in growth is very, very important. Now, just some very quick figures. I'll start off over here. As we said, unemployment is the lowest rate of 20 years, 4.5%. Over 40,000 jobs have been created in the last 5 years. If you see the net FNPF compulsory membership of around 13,000 in 2017. That's the figures here. So you see, this is the compulsory withdrawal. So essentially, if you minus that from that, you'll get approximately 13,000. So this is new compulsory membership. So in other words, these are new FNPF members of 13,000. What does that mean? They're joining the workforce. Of course, there are some people who are still not there because some of the employers are trying to dodge the system. There are some people, for example, in the construction industry, not paying them FNPF. And that's a constant battle for us. So if we have greater compliance, then you see those numbers actually increase significantly. RBF used to take only Fiji Times until 2013, right? So prior to 2013, RBF only used to look at the job advertisements in the Fiji Times, and they started looking at the Fiji Sun too, because people obviously, advertise in both the papers. Unemployment has been declining. It's about 4.5% at this particular stage of 2017. So there's strong investment. There's a lot of construction going on. New investment lending has grown by 25%. Building permits grew by 32%. A lot of high confidence by RBF surveys, low interest environment supporting investments that we have. VAT collection has increased by 13.9%. New consumption lending increased by 12.1%. This is given out by the banks. Mobile vehicles now. Just look at the difference. If you look at total vehicles registered on roads, almost 220,000 this year compared to 80,000 in 2006. It's quite significant. In 2016, on average, 41 vehicles were registered per day compared to 16 in 2007 and 6 in 1998. So in 2017, kind of stabilized around about 34 vehicles per day. Yeah, it's an interesting issue. The story that I would like to also tell. I have somebody who drives my government vehicle. His name is Saki. Saki has got a family. He's got 5 kids. He's a fantastic driver. He's worked as a mechanic before. Now, his ambition has always been to own a car. Now, last year, he actually, applied for a loan, and he got the loan, and he's got his car. Now, he took his family for the first time around Vitilevu. They'd never been around Vitilevu. Now he takes, in the days when he gets off, which is hardly ever, he goes to Pacific Harbour and takes his family there. When he wants to go and visit people in his village, he's from Tailevu, he lives in Nandera, he takes his car. Now, a lot of people are saying, because there are so many cars, we should stop people buying cars. No. We have to change our attitude towards cars. Why should we deprive somebody like Saki from owning a car? That's his individual right to do that. He wants to enjoy his life. He wants his family to enjoy the spoils of his hard work. It's a fact. But, yes, we need to change our attitude as to how we go to work. What mode of transportation do we use? So as you know that we're doing, for example, 4-laning between Nasori and Suva. Some of you, I'm sure many of your relatives who live in Australia and New Zealand, a lot of them go to work by public transportation. But they own 3 cars in the family. But they go to work by public transportation. It's too expensive to go by car. Or it'll take them 5 hours to get to work. So what they do is they take their car, they live in the suburbs, they go to the railway station, they park their car at the railway car park, they jump on the train, go to work, come back from the train, get in the car, go home. That's what we're going to do, and as we said already in Parliament, that's what we're going to do when the 4-lane is done. So if I live, for example, in Davilevu inside, I should be able to drive from my house, jump in the car, get to the main road somewhere that I can park, get on the bus. We have dedicated bus lanes in the morning, say between 6:30 a.m. and 8:30 or 9 a.m. The left lane, you go to Sydney and various other places, that's what they do. You jump on the bus, dedicated bus lane, no other car or vehicle can drive on that particular lane. I get to Suva within 20 minutes. I go to work. In the afternoon, I jump on the bus again. My dedicated bus lane is there, and in the afternoon it's also free too. I come home. I get off, jump in the car, go home. Of course, then I want to go to route so I can drive in my car. So you reduce your carbon footprint, and you reduce the time spent on the road. But the point of the matter is, a lot of people in Fiji don't use public transportation because they believe they belong to a particular social class. As I say, I always use the examples of the lawyers in the AG's chambers. They all wear suits, they'll never catch the bus, they'll go home in the taxi. They're away. It's a reality, but the same people who catch the bus in Sydney, they'll catch the train in Sydney, they'll catch the ferry in Sydney. It's an attitudinal thing. But of course, then they'll argue and say, I don't want to sit in a bus wearing my suit with a tarpaulin as the window. Right? Because I'll get wet. Or it's dirty. So you think the bus is about to break down. So this is why we reduced the duty on buses. Now for a small company to bring in a bus, a new bus, brand new bus from overseas, there's 0% duty. There's no duty on it whatsoever. If they go and borrow money from a bank to buy a new bus, the interest rate is 5% or less. So it's a combination of factors. It's a combination of factors you need to, as an economy, when you do the budget, it's all about balancing it. You change people's attitude, you need to get the infrastructure right, You have to make sure there's no point just doing a sort of, for example, a bus lane, dedicated bus lane, but you don't have a parking area. Because a dedicated bus that's going to travel within 20 minutes from 9 miles to Suva is not going to go inside Davulevu. It will go on the main road. So you have to think about how will the person from living inside Davulevu will get to the main road. If they do get to the main road, where will they park their car? It's about building infrastructure that's also related, ancillary type of services. So that's part of the equation that we're looking at. Foreign reserves, a lot of people don't understand necessarily foreign reserves. Nearly everything that I've got is not made in Fiji. This mic is not made in Fiji. This pointer is not made in Fiji. This watch I'm wearing is not made in Fiji. This lady's got gel in her hair, is not made in Fiji. All of these things. These chairs probably were designed overseas. This material is made overseas. This carpet is made overseas. So in order to buy things from overseas, you need to have enough foreign currency, because they're not going to sell it to you in Fijian dollars. They sell it to you in US dollars, Japanese yen, euros. We buy all our fuel from Singapore. So you need to have enough foreign reserves. Colloquially speaking, a lot of countries do assessments of other countries, or organizations do that. If your foreign reserves are low, then they say you're not necessarily trading well, or your economic outlook is looking bleak. Or you're going bankrupt, they say, because you can't trade. Some Pacific Island countries, without naming them at the moment, is very hard. I know some Fijian companies at the moment who sell goods to one particular Pacific Island countries, no longer give them goods on credit. Normally you have a 30-day payment. They send whatever that they pay them within 30 days, because the Reserve Bank over there is not allowing them to send foreign reserves out. They're low on foreign reserves. Traditionally, the benchmark is this. You should have at least 4 months worth of foreign reserves to be deemed to be healthy. If you have 4 months worth of foreign reserves to trade, then you're doing okay. I don't have to spell all this out. You look at where foreign reserves were, how it sort of jumped up. Now it's sitting at about 4.9 months worth of foreign reserves and about $2.1 billion. What is really significant is this. Even though over here you are $1.3 billion, you are somewhere about 4.5. Over here you over 2 billion, but you have 4.9. Why? Because the economic activity has increased in Fiji. So every day in Fiji as we speak, somebody is getting connected to electricity. You're spending, I've not highlighted here, this is budget spending about $40 million. Come on. $44 million, rural electrification projects. The moment you connect somebody to electricity, what do? They buy a TV, they buy a washing machine, they buy a microwave, stereo. All of these things are not made in Fiji. It puts pressure on your foreign reserves. So as your economy grows, people's needs and demands also grow. So that's why we need to actually continuously have healthy foreign reserves. So you can see what I mean. Because even though we've got $2.1 million, we have 4.9 months worth of trading because of the fact that we're doing a lot of trading. Okay, what's driving inflation? Basic thing, price in Fiji is dictated by global price of fuel, food and other imports. You eat panikeke, you eat pudding, you eat bread. Everybody eats bread every morning. The raw ingredient of bread is not grown in Fiji, which is wheat. We import wheat at world market prices. We have FMF, we have Punja and Sons that makes flour out of it. The prices of wheat and therefore the consequential cost of those things are driven by the price we pay for meat, which we cannot dictate at all. Fuel prices are not dictated by us. Fuel prices, is about $66 US dollars a barrel. A few months back, it was about less than $40 a barrel. I remember in 2009, I think it was, the US dollars a barrel, it was about $140 a barrel. That we cannot control. So we are prone to world market commodity prices. The other thing that we are prone to, which we cannot control, is cyclones. That's why we don't like cyclones. Apart from the fact it kills people, destroys things, it also means that a bunch of bananas in Suva after cyclone winds, a small bundle costs $20. Normally it costs $5. Long beans used to cost $5 a bundle. after Winston. You know what happened after Winston 2 and the other cyclone with Kaba? Those of you doing growth? $140 a kilo, at one stage $200 a kilo. Now that we cannot control. Now in order to measure inflation, we have a basket of goods that we use to measure inflation. The same way we have a basket of currencies. So, if you look at the overall inflation over here in 2015 was 1.6%, of which 0.6 came from alcohol, tobacco, and kava. Inflation excluding alcohol, tobacco, and kava was 1%. Obviously, take that out from that and give you that. You can see in 2016, contribution of 3.9%, tobacco, alcohol, and kava contributed 2.7% of our inflation. When you say, they say, oh, inflation is 3.9, but in fact 2.7 came from only 3 goods. And that's a fact. So over here, of course, we see inflation change slightly. June 2018, inflation is 4.6. Contribution of alcohol, tobacco, and kava is 1.7. Overall contribution by other goods is 2.9%. So that's how inflation is measured. And of course, the supply disruptions are caused by natural disaster, result in temporary price hikes. The same as the example I gave you about bananas, etc. I don't know if you want me to go into all of this, but I'd like to really have some questions. Shall I stop there and maybe you can ask any questions? Or do you want me to go on with that? There's only a few more slides left. Do you want me to go on with that, or do you want to open up the floor for questions? Floor? Let's go. Okay. Please. Where's the deadline? All right, let's go. Please pass the mic around and ask some questions.